Imagine a day when knights in shining armor, clashing swords and roaring battle cries weren't just part of a story but a brutal reality. In the heart of medieval France, on a fateful day in September 1356, a king's rage and a prince's desperation collided in a battle that would change the course of history. The air was thick with tension, the ground trembled under the hooves of war horses, and the fate of an entire kingdom hung in the balance. This is the story of the Battle of Poitiers, where King Jean II of France and the Black Prince, Edward of Woodstock, faced off in one of the most decisive battles of the 100 Years' War. It all began on a chilly April day in 1356, when the Dauphin, the future King of France, was hosting a grand banquet in the city of Rouen. The guests included Charles of Navarre, a powerful nobleman, and other leading Norman lords. The atmosphere was festive, but it was about to take a dark turn. Suddenly, the doors burst open, and King Jean II, wearing a helmet and surrounded by his guards, stormed into the hall. The king's marshal, Dodraham, shouted, "Let no one move or he is a dead man." The king, furious and accusing Charles of Navarre of treason, seized him and several others, including Jean de Harcourt. The Dauphin, horrified, begged his father to spare his guests, but the king was determined to punish what he saw as traitors. The next morning, the king, dressed in full armor, personally oversaw the execution of Jean de Harcourt, Colin Doublel, and 2 other Norman lords. They were decapitated in a field, their bodies hung in chains, and their heads displayed on lances. Charles of Navarre was imprisoned in the Chatelet in Paris, and his estates were confiscated. This brutal display of power did more harm than good, as it only fueled sympathy for Charles and his allies, who began to seek help from England to reclaim their lands. By July 1356, the situation had escalated. Charles of Navarre and Jean de Harcourt's brother, Godfrey, appealed to King Edward III of England for assistance. The English, seeing an opportunity to gain a foothold in Normandy, landed at Cherbourg and began their campaign. Meanwhile, the Black Prince, Edward of Woodstock, was leading an English and Gascon force of about 8,000 men from Bordeaux, intent on causing as much damage as possible on his way north. The prince's strategy was simple: raid, plunder, and avoid a pitched battle. He reached the Loire River on or around September 3, but found the bridges destroyed. After hesitating for 4 days, he decided to turn south to avoid the growing French army and return to Bordeaux with his spoils. King Jean, determined to force the prince back into Aquitaine or even back to England, had summoned a massive army to rendezvous at Chartres. The French nobility responded in force, and the king's army, described as the flower of France, numbered around 16,000 men. Despite its size, the French army lacked cohesion. The nobles arrived with their own troops, each flying their own banners, and with their own household and baggage trains. The king, confident in his superior numbers, was ready to engage the enemy. On September 12, the Black Prince was at Montbazon near Tours, where he met with papal legates, including Cardinal Talleyrand de Périgord, who were trying to negotiate a truce. The prince, however, rejected the offer, perhaps overconfident in his ability to elude the French. As the French army crossed the Loire and pushed south, the prince was nearly overtaken. On September 17, a French reconnaissance unit led by Roel de Coucy, a renowned knight, encountered an English unit at La Chapauterie. Despite being outnumbered, the English repelled the French, capturing Roel. The prince, now aware that battle was inevitable, halted his forces and prepared for the coming fight. On the morning of September 18, the French army, led by King Jean, came into view. The king, confident of victory, was persuaded by Cardinal Talleyrand to delay the attack until the next day to observe the Truce of God. The prince, realizing his desperate situation, made a series of extraordinary concessions, including offering to restore all prisoners and occupied places, and even to surrender Calais and Ghent. However, the French demanded the prince's surrender, which he refused. The French Council of War decided to attack on foot, with a small cavalry force leading the charge. The battle began on the morning of September 19. The French, divided into 3 battalions, advanced toward the English position. The king, leading the 3rd Battalion, ordered his men to dismount, a decision that has been both praised and criticized by historians. The narrow passage and difficult terrain made a cavalry charge impractical, and dismounting allowed the French to fight more effectively in the close quarters. The battle was fierce and chaotic. The English archers, positioned behind hedges and in the woods, rained arrows down on the French. The French cavalry, led by the three military chiefs, charged through the archers' lines but were soon overwhelmed. The French infantry, advancing on foot, struggled to break through the English defenses. The Dauphin and his brother, both inexperienced in battle, found themselves in the thick of the fight. The king, surrounded by his personal guard, fought bravely but was eventually captured by the English. The Battle of Poitiers was a decisive victory for the Black Prince. The French suffered heavy casualties, and their king was taken prisoner. The capture of King Jean II was a significant blow to France, and it led to the Treaty of Bretigny in 1360, which temporarily ended the war. However, the peace was short-lived, and the conflict would continue for many more years. The Battle of Poitiers was more than just a military engagement. It was a turning point in the 100 Years' War. It demonstrated the effectiveness of the English longbow, and the tactical advantages of fighting on favorable terrain. It also exposed the disunity and lack of discipline within the French army, which would be a recurring theme throughout the war. For the Black Prince, it was a moment of glory, but for King Jean, it was a day of humiliation and defeat. In the end, the Battle of Poitiers serves as a reminder of the unpredictable nature of medieval warfare. Despite the overwhelming numbers and the confidence of the French, the English, led by a young and determined prince, emerged victorious. The consequences of that fateful day would be felt for generations to come, shaping the future of both France and England.